There's a moment at a wedding when everything goes quiet. Not because something beautiful happened, because something just broke. I was standing at the front of the church. My mother had walked up to greet my fiancé the way she always greeted people. Arms open, no pretense. And my fiancé stepped back, visibly, like she'd been asked to touch something dirty. She said it loud enough for the people nearest us to hear. "She smells like the barn. Someone keep her away from me." My mother's arms dropped. She didn't say a word. She never did. I didn't raise my voice either. I didn't have to. I reached over, took the ring off my fiancé's finger, gently, the way you'd pick up something fragile, and I said, quietly, that we were done. 240 guests went completely still. There was something else, too. Something I hadn't mentioned to anyone. A sealed envelope I'd been carrying in my jacket for almost 2 weeks. Something I hadn't had the courage to open yet. By the time we walked out of that church, my mother and I, side by side, I had. I'll tell you what was in it. But first, let me go back to the beginning, because this didn't start at the altar. It started long before that. Her name was Claire. We'd met through mutual friends at a work event about 4 years before all of this. She was sharp, well-dressed, confident in a way that I mistook for one. I was 51 at the time, a structural engineer who'd spent most of his adult life more focused on work than relationships. When Claire came along, I let myself believe I'd just been waiting for the right person. She came from a family with money. Not old money exactly, but the kind of wealth that had been around long enough that nobody talked about it directly. Her father ran a consulting group. Her mother sat on 2 nonprofit boards. They lived in a large house in the northern part of the county, the kind of neighborhood where the lawns were always perfect and the driveways always had 2 cars parked at an angle. My background was different. I grew up on a working farm about 90 minutes outside the city. My father passed when I was 13. My mother, Dorothy, raised me after that, alone on that land. She kept the farm going, managed the finances, got me through school. She was the kind of woman who didn't ask for recognition and never expected it. Dorothy was 68 now. She still lived on the property, tended the garden, sold produce at the Saturday market in town. She drove a 10-year-old truck. She wore the same boots she'd had for years. If you didn't know her, you might not look twice. Most people in Claire's circle didn't look twice. I noticed early on that Claire was polite to my mother the way people are polite to someone they're managing. Never warm, never curious. She'd ask surface questions and then redirect the conversation. When my mother talked about the farm or the land or a problem she'd solved with the irrigation that season, Claire would listen just long enough to seem present and then move on. I told myself it was just a different background, that people adjust, that it would get easier once they knew each other better. It didn't get easier. The engagement happened 2 years in. I proposed at a small restaurant we both liked, nothing elaborate. Claire said yes, and for a while things felt like they were moving in the right direction. We started planning the wedding. She had strong opinions about most of it, the venue, the flowers, the guest list. I didn't push back on much. I was happy to let her lead. My mother helped where she could. She offered to handle some of the food for the reception. Claire thanked her and said they'd already booked a caterer. My mother nodded and didn't mention it again. The church she chose was St. Catherine's, a tall stone building in the old part of town. High ceilings, long windows, the kind of place that photographs well. We had 240 guests. About 30 of them were people I actually knew. The rest were from Claire's world, colleagues, her parents' friends, people I'd met once or twice over dinner. My mother arrived the morning of the ceremony. She'd driven in the night before and stayed at a small inn nearby. She'd had her hair set, and she was wearing a blue dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion. She looked like herself, dignified, a little quiet, the way she always was in unfamiliar crowds. I saw her sit down in the 3rd row and fold her hands in her lap. I remember thinking, she drove 2 hours to be here. She pressed that dress herself. She's trying. The service went fine. I'd written my own vows, something I'd spent a few evenings getting right. Claire had written hers too. The minister said the usual words. We exchanged rings. The guests clapped. Everything was what it was supposed to be. Then came the receiving line. People moved through slowly, the way they do. Handshakes and hugs, brief comments. The ordinary ceremony of congratulations. Claire was in her element, gracious, composed, working the line like she'd been doing it her whole life. My mother waited toward the back. She always did that. Let others go first. When she reached us, she hugged me. She smelled like the soap she'd used as long as I could remember, something simple, a little floral. And underneath that, the faint, honest smell of earth. You don't get rid of it no matter how much you scrub. It's just part of farming. Part of being a person who works with their hands and their land every single day. She turned to Claire, arms open. Claire stepped back. She didn't whisper it. She said it like a passing observation to the people around her. She smells like the barn. Someone keep her away from me. One of her cousins laughed. A few others went quiet. Someone nearby let out a small, uncomfortable sound. My mother's arms came down slowly. Her face didn't change. That was the thing. She kept her expression completely still, the way people do when they've learned that showing pain only makes things worse. I said Claire's name once, calmly. She looked at me like I was overreacting. She should have cleaned up before coming. It's our wedding day. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I reached over and took the ring off her finger. Then I said we were done. That was all. The room went silent. 240 people watching a man quietly end his own wedding. We walked out through the center aisle, my mother and I, and the heavy doors of St. Catherine's closed behind us. I put my hand on her arm. She didn't speak. Neither did I. In my jacket pocket, the envelope I'd been carrying for 12 days felt heavier than it had before. The drive back to the farm took about 90 minutes. My mother sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the window. The countryside moved past, open fields, tree lines, the occasional farmhouse set back from the road. She knew this drive as well as she knew anything. She'd made it hundreds of times. She didn't cry. I didn't expect her to. About 40 minutes in, she said, quietly, "You didn't have to do that." I said, "I know." She nodded once and went back to the window. That was the whole conversation. We pulled into the gravel driveway just before 5. The farm looked the same as it always did. The white house, the red barn to the left, the long flat fields running out toward the tree line in the back. My mother had a small vegetable garden along the south side of the house, and even in June it was already full. Tomatoes starting to come in, beans climbing their wire frames. A row of sunflowers along the fence that she'd planted every summer for as long as I could remember. She got out of the truck, went inside, and a few minutes later I heard the familiar sound of pots on the stove. That was how she processed things. She cooked. I sat in the truck for a while with my phone in my hand. 41 missed calls. Text from Claire going back to about 20 minutes after we left the church. Her father had called 3 times. Her mother twice. A few names I recognized from the guest list. A few I didn't. I read some of the texts. The early ones were apologetic in the way that isn't really apologetic, more surprised than sorry. "I don't understand why you're doing this. We can fix this. Everyone's asking where you went." Then they shifted. "You're embarrassing me. You're being childish. You made your point. Then, later, you just ruined the most important day of my life." Her father's voicemail was short and measured. He said he understood I was upset, that Stephanie was emotional, that these things happened, and that I should call him so we could handle this like adults. He used the word invested, said we'd both invested too much to throw it away over a misunderstanding. I sat with that word for a moment. Invested. Then a message came in from a name I didn't expect. Claire's older sister, Nora. Nora had always been different from the rest of the family. Quieter, less concerned with appearances. She worked in commercial real estate and had a habit of saying exactly what she meant without softening at first. We'd gotten along reasonably well over the years, though we'd never been close. Her message was brief. "Charles, there are some things you should know. Things I should have told you sooner. Can you call me?" I called her. She answered on the second ring. "Are you somewhere you can talk?" I said yes. There was a pause. The kind that means someone is deciding how far to go. "Claire has been making plans," she said. "Not about the wedding. About after." I asked her what kind of plans. Another pause. "She's been talking about your mother for months. About what she was going to do once you were married. She told me she thought your mother was getting too old to be living alone out there. That she was going to convince you it would be better, safer, to move her into a facility. A managed care place. She'd already been looking into options." I didn't say anything. "She called it helping," Nora said. She had a whole version of it in her head where she was doing the responsible thing. But Charles, she'd already contacted a lawyer. Someone who specializes in elder care and guardianship. She wasn't just thinking about it. I asked how long this had been going on. "At least 4 months. Maybe longer. And there's something else." She hesitated. "She's been talking about the farm." calling it underdeveloped, saying it's a waste of good land. She mentioned, more than once, that once you were married and your mother was settled somewhere, the property could be put to better use. She meant sold. I sat in the truck and watched a sparrow land on the fence post near the garden, stay for a moment, and leave. I should have called you sooner, Nora said. I kept thinking I was misreading her, that she wouldn't actually go through with any of it. I told her I appreciated her calling. I went inside. My mother was at the stove, stirring something in the large pot she'd had since before I was born. The kitchen smelled like onion and herbs and the faint wood smoke that always seemed to be in the walls of this house, no matter the season. She'd changed out of her dress and was back in her regular clothes, canvas pants, a plain shirt, her old slippers. She looked up when I came in. I sat down at the table, the same table where I'd done homework as a kid, where my father used to read the paper on Sunday mornings, where my mother had paid bills and written letters and done everything a person does when they're running a household alone. "Mom," I said, "I need to tell you something." She turned the heat down on the pot and came to sit across from me. I told her what Nora had said. All of it. I didn't soften it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know." I looked at her. "Not all of it," she said, "but I noticed things. The questions she asked about my health, whether I ever got confused, whether I had help with the finances." She paused. "I've managed this farm alone for 30 years. I know what those questions mean." I asked her why she hadn't said anything. She looked at me the way mothers sometimes do, patient, a little tired. "Because you were happy," she said. "Or you seemed happy." And I wasn't certain. I thought maybe I was being unfair to her. She got up and went back to the stove. I sat at that table for a while after she went to bed. My phone rang twice more, Claire both times. I let it go to voicemail. Then her father again. I let that go too. I pulled the envelope out of my jacket pocket and set it on the table. It had my name on the front in handwriting I recognized. My father's lawyer, a man named Gerald Park who had handled the family's legal matters for decades. Gerald had retired 2 years ago, but he'd sent this through his former associate. The letter accompanying it said he'd been waiting for the right time to pass it along, and that he believed I was now old enough and settled enough to understand what it contained. I'd received it 12 days before the wedding. I hadn't opened it because I'd been afraid it would complicate things. I told myself I'd deal with it after. Now I opened it. I read through it slowly. Then I read it again. Then I set it down on the table and stared at the wall for a long time. My great-grandfather had purchased the land in the early part of the last century, when this part of the state was still largely undeveloped and the cost per acre was low enough that a working man could accumulate it over time if he was patient and careful. He was both. He bought parcels over 20 years, always quietly, never drawing attention. The farm had stayed in the family ever since, through lean years and good ones, through my grandfather's time and then my father's. My father had added to it where he could. When he died, everything passed to my mother. What the letter contained were the updated documents, property assessments, lease agreements, appraisals conducted the previous year by 2 independent firms. The farm, the land, the mineral rights, the development potential, the existing lease arrangements with 3 agricultural companies had been assessed at just over $11 million. The annual income from the existing leases was listed at approximately $1.8 million. My mother had never mentioned any of this. Not once. Not to me, not as far as I knew to anyone. I sat in the kitchen of the house where I'd grown up and thought about the woman who had driven herself to my wedding in a 10-year-old truck, who had ironed her dress herself, who had stood in a receiving line with her arms open and been told she smelled like a barn. I thought about Claire, somewhere in the city right now, calling my phone and waiting for me to come back. I thought about the word invested. I put the envelope in the inside pocket of my jacket. Then I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. I was up before 6. My mother was already in the kitchen. She had coffee going and was standing at the window looking out at the garden the way she did most mornings, not distracted, just present, watching the light come in. I poured a cup and sat down. She didn't ask how I'd slept. She could tell. We sat together for a while without talking. The refrigerator hummed. A bird started up somewhere outside. The coffee was strong the way she always made it. Eventually she said, "What are you going to do today?" I said I wasn't sure yet, that I needed to make a few calls. She nodded and went back to her coffee. That was enough for her. She didn't need more than that. My phone had 23 missed calls by the time I looked at it. I went through them without listening to most of the voicemails. Claire, her father, two numbers I didn't recognize. One from Nora again, left sometime around midnight. I called Nora back first. She answered quickly, like she'd been waiting. I found something, she said. Last night after we talked, I went to Claire's apartment. She'd given me a spare key months ago. I let myself in. I asked what she found. She left in a hurry. Most of her clothes are gone, her passport, the good jewelry. But her desk, she didn't clear it. Or she didn't have time to. I waited. There are documents, Charles. Papers with your mother's name on them. Legal papers. I didn't want to touch anything until I talked to you. But I've looked at them closely enough to know what they are. I was already standing up. I'll be there in 40 minutes, I said. I told my mother I had an errand to run in the city. She asked if everything was all right. I said I thought it would be. She looked at me for a moment, then said, "Drive carefully." Claire's apartment was on the 14th floor of a building in the newer part of downtown. Her parents had been covering the rent, something in the range of $2,600 a month. The lobby had a doorman and a fountain and the kind of lighting that was designed to make you feel like you'd arrived somewhere. Nora was waiting for me by the elevator. She looked like she hadn't slept. She didn't say much as we rode up. When we got inside the apartment, she led me straight to the desk in the second bedroom, the room Claire had used as an office. The desk was covered in papers, not organized, pulled out and left, the way things look when someone is moving fast and grabbing what matters to them. What they'd left behind was apparently everything that didn't fit in a bag. Nora handed me a folder. I went through it slowly. The first document was a power of attorney form. It had my mother's name on it, Dorothy Hartwell, listed as the principal. The signature at the bottom was supposed to be hers. I knew immediately it wasn't. My mother's handwriting has a particular quality to it. Careful, slightly upright, the kind of penmanship that came from a generation that was taught to write properly. Whatever was on that line didn't match it. The second document was a medical evaluation. It was printed on what looked like official letterhead from a clinic called Riverside Health Associates. The evaluating physician was listed as Dr. Raymond Hollis. I read through the assessment slowly. It described my mother as showing signs of cognitive decline, difficulty with dates and recent memory, trouble managing financial obligations, periods of confusion, a recommendation that she be placed under supervised care and that her ability to make independent decisions be formally reviewed. Every line was specific, detailed, written with the language of someone who knew what the form needed to say. Every line was also false. My mother managed her own accounts, her own lease agreements, her own property taxes. She read the county agricultural newsletter every month and could tell you the current price per bushel of anything you asked about. She had never, not once in my lifetime, shown any sign of confusion about anything that mattered. I set the evaluation down and looked at Nora. "Is there a Dr. Raymond Hollis at Riverside Health?" "I called this morning," she said. "They've never heard of him." I looked back at the folder. There was a third document, a letter from a law firm called Caswell and Briggs. It outlined a plan to petition the county court to have Dorothy Hartwell declared legally incompetent on the basis of the medical evaluation. Once granted, a guardian would be appointed to manage her affairs and make decisions on her behalf. The letter named the recommended facility Millbrook Senior Care. Monthly cost listed at $7,400, nearly $90,000 a year. I put the letter down carefully, the way you put something down when you don't trust your hands. Nora pulled up something on her phone and handed it to me. It was an email thread. She'd found it on Claire's laptop, which had been left open on the desk. The thread was between Claire and a man named Douglas Merritt at a company called Merritt Land and Development. The earliest message was dated 8 months ago, 2 months after I proposed. I read through them in order. The first few were introductory. Claire presenting herself as someone with access to a significant agricultural property. Merritt responding with interest, asking for details about acreage, location, zoning. Then a message from Claire. The survey confirms 2,800 acres. Current zoning is agricultural, but the county has been approving mixed-use conversions in that corridor for the past 3 years. Conservative revenue estimate on full development is somewhere between 30 and 40 million. The current owner is elderly and will be transitioning to managed care within the year. The son is not a problem. He doesn't know the value of what he's sitting on. Merritt's response. Timeline? Claire, wedding is in June. Guardianship proceedings July or August. Property should be clear for transfer by the end of the year. I handed the phone back to Nora. She set it on the desk without saying anything. There was one more thing in the folder. A bank statement, a personal account in Claire's name. There was a deposit made 3 weeks before the wedding. $50,000. The memo field said, Project Consultation, Hartwell. It had come from Merit Land and Development. She had already been paid. Not a down payment on a future deal. Not a planning fee pending completion. She had already received money for land that wasn't hers to sell from a buyer who believed the paperwork was in order. I stood in the middle of Claire's office, surrounded by the evidence of something that had apparently been running in the background of our entire engagement, and I thought about the question her father had asked me to consider. How much have we invested in this? The answer, it turned out, was $50,000. Already transferred. Already spent. I looked at Nora. How much of this did you know? I asked. Not accusatory. I just needed to understand the edges of it. She sat down on the edge of the desk chair. The lawyer, she said quietly. 3 months ago, she asked me to help her find someone who handled elder care and estate matters. She said she was trying to get ahead of things, that she wanted to make sure your mother would be taken care of as she got older. She framed it as thoughtful planning, something she wanted to surprise you with. She paused. I helped her find the firm. I didn't know what she was actually asking them to do. She looked at her hands. I'm sorry, Charles. I genuinely didn't know. I believed her. We spent the next hour going through everything. I made notes on my phone, dates, amounts, names, document references. Nora organized the papers into 2 piles, things that were clearly fraudulent and things that were potentially just evidence of intent. Both piles were substantial. At some point, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. The message identified the sender as someone from a firm representing Merit Development. They said they'd heard there might be complications with the Willowbrook transfer and that they'd like to speak with me at my earliest convenience. They didn't know yet that I knew. They thought this was still a negotiation. I showed Nora the message. She read it and looked up. What are you going to do? I thought about the question for a moment. Not about how I felt. I already knew how I felt. I thought about the steps. Step 1. Preserve the evidence exactly as found. Step 2. Get my mother's own doctor on record about her actual condition. Step 3. Contact someone in the district attorney's office before anyone else had a chance to shape the story. I'm going to make sure this goes through the right channels, I said. All of it. In the right order. I took photographs of every document with my phone. Then I called Gerald Park's former associate, the lawyer who had sent me the estate documents, and explained what I'd found. He told me to bring everything in. He also gave me the name of someone at the district attorney's office he said I should call directly. I wrote the name down. Before I left, I looked around the apartment one more time. The marble countertops, the designer furniture, the large windows looking out over the city, a space that had been paid for, maintained, and furnished as a stage, a place to perform a version of a life that worked in one direction only, as long as no one looked too closely at the structure underneath. I picked up the folder, tucked it under my arm, and rode the elevator back down to the lobby. Outside, the city was going about its meeting. I walked to my truck, set the folder on the passenger seat, and sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. Then I drove to the district attorney's office. The district attorney's office was on the 3rd floor of the county building, a plain corridor with fluorescent lighting and doors with frosted glass panels. It smelled like old carpet and printer toner. Nothing about it felt significant. That was probably the point. The name Gerald's associate had given me was James Kowalski. He was an assistant district attorney who handled financial crimes and elder abuse cases. His assistant told me he was in a meeting but could see me in about 40 minutes if I wanted to wait. I said I'd wait.